5 years after paying her to disappear, Marcus Wright froze at the sight of Keisha Campbell walking through the Bronx Mall, her hands gently guiding two curly-haired boys who carried his unmistakable green eyes. The gleaming 42nd floor of Wright Industries buzzed with the familiar hum of ambition and expensive coffee. Marcus Wright, 36 and carved from the marble of old money privilege, stood behind his floor-to-ceiling windows, surveying the Manhattan skyline like a king overlooking his kingdom. His reflection stared back, sharp jawline, green eyes that could charm investors or freeze employees, and the kind of smile that had graced magazine covers under headlines like America's Most Eligible CEO. But today, that smile felt heavier than usual. "Mr. Wright?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 2 p.m. is here." Marcus straightened his Italian silk tie, the same shade of blue that had once made Keisha Campbell's eyes sparkle when she'd complimented it during one of their late-night strategy sessions. The memory surfaced, unbidden, unwelcome, her laughter echoing in his empty office, the way she'd bite her lower lip when concentrating on quarterly reports, how her presence had made even the most mundane board meetings feel alive. He shook his head, banishing the ghost. Keisha was gone, had been for 5 years, and that was exactly how it needed to stay. 2,000 miles away, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Augusttown, Kingston, Jamaica, that same woman was braiding her son's hair while humming an old hymn her grandmother used to sing. Keisha Campbell, now 31, softer around the edges but stronger in ways that mattered, gently worked coconut oil through 4-year-old Micah's curls. "Mama, why we gotta go to America again?" Micah asked, his voice carrying the lilting accent that reminded Keisha of home, of safety, of the choice she'd made to protect her babies. "Because Mama got a good job there, baby, and you and Marcus Jr. are gonna love the schools." She glanced at her other son, Marcus Jr., named not for his father, but for her grandfather, who was quietly stacking blocks with the same intense concentration that once characterized a certain CEO's approach to hostile takeovers. Keisha had never told anyone the whole truth about why she'd left New York so suddenly 5 years ago. Not her mother, not her sister, not even Pastor Williams, who'd held her hand through those first terrifying months of pregnancy. How could she explain that the father of her children was the same man who'd slid an envelope across his mahogany desk containing enough money to handle the situation and a plane ticket to anywhere but here? The memory still burned. Marcus's green eyes, the same ones now staring back at her through her son's faces, were cold as winter frost that day. "Keisha, be reasonable," he said, not even looking up from his laptop. "We both know this complicates things. The board, the investors, the media. Imagine the headlines. Billionaire CEO's baby mama drama. Think about your career, your future." But Keisha had thought about the future, had felt the flutter of 2 tiny heartbeats against her palms during that first ultrasound, had made a choice that had nothing to do with money or headlines or the opinion of men in $1,000 suits. "I can't," she whispered, sliding the envelope back across his desk. "I won't." Marcus had finally looked up then, his jaw tight with frustration. "Then I can't help you, and I can't have this affecting my company." The next morning, Keisha had cleaned out her desk, submitted her resignation, and boarded a plane to Kingston with nothing but her savings, her conscience, and the growing certainty that she was carrying the greatest gifts of her life. Now, 5 years later, she was returning to American soil, not as the broken woman who'd fled, but as a mother, a survivor, and a woman who'd built a life on her own terms. The job offer from a nonprofit in the Bronx wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful work, helping immigrant families navigate the system. It felt like destiny. She finished Micah's braids and kissed the top of his head.
Go help your brother clean up those blocks. We leave for the airport in an hour." As her sons scrambled to pack their toys, Keisha caught her reflection in the bedroom mirror. She'd gained weight over the years, the stress of single motherhood, the comfort of her grandmother's cooking, the simple fact that she no longer felt the need to maintain the corporate image that had once defined her. She was rounder now, softer, but there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A strength that would need to carry her through whatever lay ahead. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, in the place where intuition whispers warnings, Keisha knew that returning to New York meant risking everything she'd built. It meant the possibility that Marcus Wright might one day see the sons he'd tried to erase. But truth, like children, has a way of growing stronger in the dark. How do you feel about Keisha's decision to return to New York? Was it brave or risky? Let me know in the comments below. The Bronx Concourse Plaza Mall hummed with Saturday afternoon energy. Families pushing strollers, teenagers clustering around the food court, the familiar symphony of urban life echoing off polished floors. Marcus Wright felt conspicuously out of place in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, but his driver had insisted this was the fastest route to avoid traffic on the way to his helicopter pad. "He's just cutting through to the parking garage," he muttered to himself, checking his Patek Philippe watch. He had dinner with potential investors at 8, and first impressions matter in his business. Everything mattered in his business. That's when he saw her. At first, it was just a silhouette, a woman in a flowing yellow dress that caught the afternoon light streaming through the mall's skylights. Something about the way she moved, the gentle sway of her hips, the graceful arch of her neck as she looked down at... Marcus stopped walking. His heart performed a strange, stuttering rhythm he hadn't felt in 5 years. 2 boys, maybe 4 or 5 years old, flanked the woman like small sentinels. They wore matching white button-down shirts and tan pants, their hands clasped in hers as she guided them past the Spencer's store, past the pretzel stand, past the bubble tea shop where teenagers laughed over their phones.
But it was their hair that made Marcus's breath catch. Soft brown curls that caught the light just like his had when he was their age. And when one of the boys turned his head, following the sound of children playing in the center court, green eyes. Unmistakable, piercing green eyes that Marcus had seen every morning in his bathroom mirror for 36 years. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible over the mall's ambient noise. "No, no, no." The woman turned then, perhaps sensing his stare across the crowded walkway. And Marcus Wright, who had faced down hostile takeovers, congressional hearings, and boardroom coups without flinching, felt his world tilt on its axis. Keisha Campbell, 5 years older, her face fuller but somehow more radiant than he remembered. Her hair was different, longer, styled in soft waves instead of the professional chignon she'd worn at Wright Industries. She'd gained weight, her curves more pronounced in the bright yellow dress, but she carried herself with a confidence that made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with corporate dress codes or magazine standards. She was beautiful, and she was walking through the Bronx Mall with 2 children who looked exactly like him. What would you do if you came face to face with a choice you thought you'd buried forever? Tell us in the comments. Their eyes met across the distance, 50 feet that might as well have been 50 miles. Keisha's steps faltered, her hand instinctively tightening on her son's fingers. Marcus watched her lips part slightly, saw the exact moment recognition dawned in her dark eyes, followed immediately by something that hit him like a physical blow. Fear. She was afraid of him. This woman who had once challenged his ideas in board meetings, who had made him laugh during 18-hour workdays, who had kissed him with a passion that made him forget about profit margins and stock prices.
She was afraid of him. The boys, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding above their heads, tugged gently at their mother's hands. "Mama, you okay?" The voice carried across the mall corridor, sweet and concerned and unmistakably similar to Marcus's own childhood tone, a fact his mother had mentioned in countless home videos. Keisha blinked, as if waking from a trance. She looked down at her sons, their sons, and Marcus saw her transformation in real time. The fear melted away, replaced by something fiercer, more protective. When she looked back at him, her chin was raised in a gesture of defiance he remembered well. She mouthed one word: "No." Then she turned, gathered her boys closer, and began walking in the opposite direction with deliberate, measured steps. Not running, she had too much dignity for that, but moving with clear purpose away from the man who had tried to pay her to erase the very children now clutching her hands. Marcus stood frozen for a heartbeat, watching the yellow dress disappear into the crowd like a flame being extinguished. Then, without conscious thought, his feet began moving. Past startled shoppers, past the kiosk selling phone cases, past the pretzel stand where the smell of salt and butter should have made him nauseous, but didn't register at all. "Keisha!" The name escaped his throat raw and desperate. "Keisha, wait!" She didn't stop, didn't even slow down, but one of the boys, the one with the more serious expression, the one who carried himself like a tiny executive, glanced back over his shoulder. Green eyes met green eyes across a mall food court, and Marcus Wright felt the ground shift beneath his Italian leather shoes. Those were his children. His sons, walking away from him in a Bronx mall with the woman he'd destroyed 5 years ago. And for the first time in his carefully orchestrated life, Marcus Wright had absolutely no idea what to do next. Marcus's expensive shoes slapped against the polished mall floor as he weaved through clusters of weekend shoppers, his usually perfect composure cracking with each step. A mother with a stroller shot him an annoyed look as he brushed past her. Teenagers scattered as he cut through their circle near the GameStop entrance. He didn't care. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wright didn't care what anyone thought. All he could see was yellow fabric disappearing around the corner toward the mall's east wing. "Keisha!" he called again, louder this time. A security guard near the jewelry store looked up, hand moving instinctively toward his radio. Marcus forced himself to slow down, to remember where he was, who he was supposed to be. CEOs didn't chase women through shopping malls. CEOs maintained control. But as he rounded the corner and saw Keisha kneeling beside a bench, frantically digging through her purse while the two boys stood patiently beside her, control felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. "Mama, what you looking for?" the smaller boy asked, his Jamaican accent soft but unmistakable. Marcus's steps slowed as he watched the child, his child, place a comforting hand on Keisha's shoulder. Just Mama's phone, baby. Give me 1 second." Keisha's hands shook as she rifled through her bag. The other boy, the serious one who'd looked back at him, tugged at her mother's dress. "Is it the man in the fancy suit, Mama? He looks hungry." Keisha's head snapped up, her eyes finding Marcus as he approached. She stood slowly, positioning herself slightly in front of her sons in a gesture so instinctively protective that made my chest tighten. "Boys," she said, her voice steadying with visible effort, "why don't you go look at the toy store window right there? Stay where Mama can see you." "But Mama—" "Now, please." The steel in her voice brooked no argument. Both children walked the few feet to the nearby toy store, close enough to hear if she called, far enough to give the adults space to destroy each other. Marcus stood 3 feet away, close enough to smell her perfume, something floral and warm that he didn't recognize, nothing like the expensive French scent she'd worn to corporate events. Everything about her was different now, softer but somehow more strong, like she'd shed the armor of their old world and found something better underneath. 5 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 5 years and you never... What? Keisha's eyes flashed with an anger that Marcus stepped back. Never told you about them? Never asked for child support? Never showed up at your office with 2 crying babies demanding you take responsibility? The words hit like physical blows. Marcus glanced toward the boys, both now pressed against the toy store window, watching remote control cars with the kind of focused attention that made his heart ache. They're mine. It wasn't a question. Keisha's laugh was sharp, bitter. Yours, Marcus. You paid me to get rid of them. You handed me an envelope of money like I was some kind of transaction to be completed. I was scared. The board, the investors, my family's reputation. Your reputation. Keisha's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. Do you know what happened to my reputation when I left? When I showed up in Kingston pregnant with twins and no father in sight? Do you know what it's like to explain to your grandmother why the man who got you pregnant won't even acknowledge you exist?
Marcus flinched. He'd never thought about her family, her community, the judgments she must have faced. In his world, problems were solved with NDAs and wire transfers. In hers, apparently, they were faced with grace and stubborn courage. How do you think children process seeing their parents in conflict? Share your thoughts below. I named one of them after you, Keisha continued, her voice thick with emotion she was fighting to control. Not because I loved you, though God help me I did, but because they deserved to know they came from strength, even if their father was too weak to claim them. The words landed like a punch to his solar plexus. Marcus looked again at the boys, trying to reconcile their existence with the choice he'd made 5 years ago. The smaller one, Micah, he'd heard her call him, was making faces at his reflection in the store window. The other one, Marcus Jr., stood with his hands clasped behind his back, studying the toy display with an intensity that reminded Marcus painfully of himself. What are their middle names? The question surprised them both. Keisha blinked, thrown by the unexpected shift. What? Their middle names. I want to know. She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was genuine curiosity or some new form of manipulation. Finally, she sighed. Micah Alexander, Marcus Jr. Isaiah, after my grandfather and my father. Strong names. Marcus's throat felt tight. They look healthy, happy. They are. Keisha's voice softened slightly. They're good boys, Marcus. Smart, kind, funny. Micah never meets a stranger, and Marcus Jr. can build anything with Legos. They help me cook dinner every night and say their prayers before bed, and... She stopped, as if realizing she was sharing too much with a man who'd forfeited the right to know these details. Why are you here? In New York, I mean. Work. A good job with an immigrant advocacy nonprofit in the Bronx. The boys will start kindergarten in the fall. She paused. We're staying. The finality in her voice made something clench in Marcus's chest. They were staying. His sons were going to grow up 40 minutes from his office, and he would never know them. Marcus... No. She held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up after 5 years and want to play daddy because it's convenient now. You made your choice. I made a mistake. You made a choice, she repeated more firmly, and I made mine. These boys don't need a father who's ashamed of them. Marcus watched his sons, and the word felt foreign and precious and terrifying in his mind.
The smaller one, Micah, had convinced his brother to press his face against the glass too, and they were both giggling at their distorted reflections. They looked happy, whole, complete, without him. I want to know them. The words came out raw, honest, stripped of the calculated charm he usually employed. She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something, sincerity perhaps, or the absence of the cold calculation that had defined their last conversation. "Mama!" Micah's voice carried across the space between them. "Can we get pretzels? I'm hungry." The spell broke. Keisha looked at her sons, then back at Marcus, and I saw her armor slide back into place. "We have to go," she said simply. "Come on, boys." "Keisha, please!" "My number's the same. If you figure out what you actually want, call me. But Marcus, don't call unless you're sure, because those boys deserve better than a father who shows up when it's convenient and disappears when it's not." And with that, she took her son's hands and walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone beside a toy store window, watching his family, disappear into the crowd for the second time in 5 years. But this time, he wasn't going to let them go without a fight. Marcus stood frozen in the mall corridor for exactly 37 seconds. He'd remember the precise duration later because it was the longest 37 seconds of his life. Around him, the weekend crowd flowed like water around a stone, families and teenagers and elderly couples moving with purpose, while he remained paralyzed by the weight of a choice he'd been avoiding 5 years. His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant. "Helicopter waiting, investors confirmed at 8 p.m., car is at level B parking." The old Marcus, the Marcus who had built an empire on calculated decisions and risk management, would have walked to that elevator, taken that car, made that dinner, would have compartmentalized this encounter as an unfortunate coincidence and moved on with his carefully orchestrated life. But the image of his sons' faces, Micah's dimpled grin and Marcus Jr.'s serious green eyes, burned behind his eyelids like a brand. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed. "James, cancel dinner. Cancel everything for the rest of the weekend." I could hear his assistant's sharp intake of breath on the other end. "And call my mother. Tell her I need to see her tonight. It's important." He hung up before James could respond and started walking, not towards the parking garage, but deeper into the mall, following the path Keisha and his sons had taken.
He found them at the food court, settled at a small table near the subway station. Keisha was helping Micah unwrap a sandwich while Marcus Jr. methodically arranged his apple slices in perfect rows. The domestic simplicity of the scene, mustard packets, napkins, a small spilled cup of juice that no one had bothered to clean up yet, hit Marcus with unexpected force. This was what he'd given up. Not just the children, but moments like this. Saturday afternoon lunches and patience for small messes, and the kind of love that came with no conditions and no quarterly projections. He approached their table slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Keisha, please, 5 minutes." She looked up, wariness flickering across her face. "Marcus, Mama, who's that man?" Micah asked around a mouthful of sandwich, his bright eyes curious rather than afraid. Keisha's face went through a series of micro-expressions: panic, calculation, resignation. Marcus watched her make a decision in real time. "Boys, this is Marcus. He's someone Mama used to work with." "Like Uncle Andrew from the church?" Marcus Jr. asked, his serious gaze moving between his mother and the strange man hovering beside their table. "Something like that," Keisha said carefully. Marcus knelt down so he was at eye level with the boys, his expensive suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. Not just the eyes and hair, but the way Marcus Jr. tilted his head when he was thinking. The way Micah's smile was slightly crooked on one side.
"Hi," Marcus said, his voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "You guys having a good lunch?" "It's okay. The bread's a little soggy, but Mama says beggars can't be choosers." The phrase, clearly something Keisha said regularly, made Marcus's chest tighten. His sons were eating soggy sandwiches in a mall food court while he dropped $300 on lunch at Les Bernardines without thinking twice. What do you think it means to truly take responsibility for your past mistakes? Let us know in the comments. "Mama," Marcus Jr. said suddenly, his young voice cutting through the ambient noise of the food court with startling clarity, "why are you crying?" Marcus looked up to see tears sliding down Keisha's cheeks, her hands pressed flat against the plastic table, as if she were trying to hold herself together through sheer force of will. "I'm okay, baby," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. And in that moment, Marcus Wright made the most important decision of his life. He stood up, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he'd never expected to use in a situation like this. "Hello? This is Marcus Wright calling for Jennifer Martinez at Channel 7 News." "Yes, I'll hold." "Marcus, what are you doing?" Keisha's voice was sharp with alarm. "Jennifer, Marcus Wright, CEO of Wright Industries. I need to schedule an interview, tonight if possible." "Yes, it's urgent." He paused, his eyes never leaving Keisha's face. "I need to tell the truth about something. About my children." Keisha's mouth fell open. "Marcus, you can't." "I can," he said, ending the call. "And I should have done it 5 years ago." He knelt back down, this time addressing both boys directly. "Micah, Marcus Jr., there's something I need to tell you. Something important." "Marcus, no!" Keisha whispered, but he could hear something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of forgiveness. "I'm your daddy," Marcus said simply. "I made some very bad choices before you were born, and I hurt your mama. But I want to try to make it right, if she'll let me, if you will let me." The food court seemed to hold its breath. Micah looked confused, his young mind clearly struggling to process this information. Marcus Jr. studied Marcus's face with that intense focus, as if he were solving a complex equation. Finally, Micah spoke. "Are you going to take us away from Mama?" "No," Marcus said immediately. "Never. I would never do that." "Are you going to be mean to Mama?" Marcus Jr. asked, his voice carrying a protectiveness that made Marcus's heart break and swell simultaneously. "No, buddy. I'm going to try very hard to be the kind of daddy you both deserve, the kind your mama deserves." Marcus Jr. considered this, then nodded once decisively. "Okay, but if you're mean to Mama, I'll tell Uncle Andrew, and he's very strong." Despite everything, the tears, the fear, the weight of 5 years of mistakes, Marcus found himself smiling. "That sounds fair." He looked up at Keisha, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I want to do this right," he said. "Whatever that means, however long it takes. I want to be their father. I want to be better than I was." Keisha was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Finally, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his, the first time they'd touched in 5 years. "It's going to be hard," she said softly. "They don't know you. I don't know if I can trust you. And there are going to be people who judge us, judge them." "Let them," Marcus said, surprising himself with the fierce certainty in his voice. "These are my sons. This is my family, and I'm done hiding from that." 6 months later. The Sunday afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Marcus's penthouse, no longer a sterile monument to wealth, but a home filled with the organized chaos of family life. Lego constructions dotted the marble coffee table, crayon drawings covered the refrigerator, and the sound of children's laughter echoed off walls that had been silent for too long. "Daddy, watch this!" Micah called out from the living room, where he was attempting to build a tower taller than himself using every pillow in the apartment. Marcus looked up from the kitchen island, where he was helping Marcus Jr. mix pancake batter, a Saturday morning tradition they'd established after the boys had declared his first attempt flatter than roadkill. The comparison had been Keisha's contribution, delivered with a smile that told him they were going to be okay. "Careful, buddy," Marcus called back, wiping flour from his hands. "The lamp was already wobbly," Micah protested, his accent now a delightful blend of Jamaica and New York that never failed to make Marcus smile. "Daddy, I think it's ready now." The words still sent a shock of warmth through Marcus's chest every time he heard it. Daddy, not the distant father he'd called his own parent, but something warm and immediate and earned through Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime stories and the thousand small moments that make a family. The front door opened and Keisha's voice carried through the apartment. "I'm back, and I brought reinforcements." She appeared in the kitchen doorway carrying grocery bags, her hair pulled back in a colorful head wrap, wearing the kind of relaxed weekend clothes that made her look younger, happier. Behind her, Pastor Williams, from their church in Jamaica, now their church in New York, smiled broadly at the domestic scene. "Uncle Pasta!" both boys shouted, abandoning their respective projects to launch themselves at the elderly man who had become a surrogate grandfather since their move to New York. "Well, well," Pastor Williams chuckled, accepting their enthusiastic hugs. "Seemed like this family is doing just fine." Marcus felt the familiar nervousness he always experienced around Pastor Williams, the man who had held Keisha when she cried during those first lonely months of pregnancy, who had baptized the boys, who had every right to judge Marcus harshly for his failures. Instead, the pastor had become an unexpected ally, offering guidance and wisdom as Marcus learned to navigate fatherhood and the complex process of rebuilding trust with Keisha. "How was church?" Marcus asked, moving to help Keisha with the groceries. Their fingers brushed as she handed him a bag, and the simple contact still sent electricity up his arm. "Good," she said, her smile soft and genuine, "though someone was asking when you're going to start coming with us." It was an ongoing conversation between them. Marcus had attended a few services, sitting awkwardly in his expensive suits, while around him families in their Sunday best welcomed him with the kind of grace he'd never encountered in boardrooms. The sermons about forgiveness and redemption hit closer to home than he had expected. "Maybe next week," he said, meaning it. "I want to be there when the boys do their presentation about family trees." Marcus Jr. had been working on the project for weeks, carefully drawing pictures of his mother, his grandparents in Jamaica, Uncle Pastor, and, in a development that still made Marcus's throat tight, his daddy, with a briefcase and a smile. What does it mean to you when a family truly comes together? Share your story in the comments.
"Daddy, can we call Grandma Wright before lunch?" Micah asked, referring to Marcus's mother, who had surprised everyone, including herself, by embracing her newfound role as grandmother with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. She'd been sending care packages from Martha's Vineyard weekly and had already booked tickets to visit for the boy's birthday next month. "Of course," Marcus said. "She'll want to see how much you've grown since last week." Pastor Williams settled into the breakfast nook, accepting a cup of coffee from Keisha with the easy familiarity of family. "You know," he said, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had seen many families navigate difficult waters, "I've been watching you all these months, and I keep thinking about something my grandmother used to say." "What's that?" Keisha asked, settling beside him. "She said that God's grace isn't just about forgiveness, it's about second chances. And sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that had to find their way back to each other." Marcus flipped the first pancake, golden and perfect, while his sons chattered about their plans for the afternoon. A trip to the park, maybe ice cream, definitely a movie night, with all of them piled on the couch sharing popcorn. As he listened to their voices blend together, Keisha's laughter, the boys' excitement, Pastor Williams' gentle teasing, Marcus realized that this was what he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing it. Not success or wealth or power, but this, the sound of his family being happy. That evening, after Pastor Williams had gone home and the boys were asleep in their room, they'd insisted on bunk beds and sharing, despite Marcus's offer to give them separate rooms. Marcus and Keisha sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights. "The interview airs tomorrow," Keisha said quietly, referring to the follow-up piece the news station was doing about their family, a year later retrospective on the CEO who had publicly acknowledged his children and changed his entire life. "Nervous?" Marcus asked. "No," she said, surprising him. "For the first time in 5 years, I'm not nervous about anything." She leaned against his shoulder, and Marcus wrapped his arm around her, breathing in the scent of her hair and the promise of all their tomorrows. Through the open balcony door, they could hear the soft sounds of their son sleeping. Marcus Jr.'s steady breathing, Micah's occasional sleepy murmur, the sounds of a family at peace. Marcus Wright had spent his entire life building an empire, but it turned out his greatest legacy was sleeping in bunk beds down the hall, dreaming of pancakes and park visits and the father who had finally come home. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.